Welcome to State of the State. My name is Richard August and I'll be your host. Our guest is Patrick Donovan, Varnum Armory Vice President and Museum Curator. Welcome to State of the State.
Thank you, Richard.
A while back, State of the State aired a program on the militia armories around the state, and today we'll focus on the Varnum Armory located on Main Street in East Greenwich. This is the home of the Varnum Continentals, a unit of the organized militia in Rhode Island. First, why don't you tell us, our audience, about the Continentals themselves, the unit?
So the Varnum Continentals, they formed as an organization in 1907. Before they existed, most of our founding members were part of the Kentish Guard militia in East Greenwich. They originally formed in 1774. They had an election of officers at the turn of the century, and there was a disagreement, and the group basically split in half. And the group that split away, they ended up forming the Varnum Continentals. They form as a patriotic militia, a ceremonial militia, historic military command, and they built the armory in 1913 to 1914 when they opened the doors. It was a place to meet and congregate, to perform drills, and very quickly, though, it also served as a military museum. I found references as early as the 1920s that the Varnum Armory was a military history museum, in addition to its role as a headquarters for the Varnum Continental militia.
So East Greenwich is actually home to two organized militias, Kentish Guards and the Varnum Continentals.
Correct.
The Continentals are an offshoot of the Kentish Guards.
Correct.
Okay. So they can trace their origin back to the Revolutionary War?
That's correct. So we take the name of James Mitchell Varnum. So he's a resident of East Greenwich. He's a lawyer, and he's one of the co-founders of the Kentish Guard militia. Again, in 1774, the town was under threat of being burned to the ground, and so the town raised this militia to protect it. And James Mitchell Varnum worked with Nathaniel Greene, who would later go on to become one of the most successful American generals in Washington's army and commanded the armies in the South. But James Mitchell Varnum also became a brigade commander in General Washington's Continental Army. He would later return home to Rhode Island, continue practicing law. He would become head of all Rhode Island militia forces. Late in the war, he would become a judge, and he was transferred out to the Northwest Territories, modern-day Ohio, and sadly, he became ill and passed away. But he was a lawyer, a judge, two-term member of the Continental Congress, a general in Washington's army, and he does all of this stuff before the age of 40, which always makes me feel like a slacker today.
Yeah. Was the armory constructed with state funds or private donations, or how was the building itself?
Believe it or not, it was all done through private donations, private fundraisings. It was done all by us. And so it was a private armory. And early in it's not long after its opening, starting in the 1920s, we began to lease the armory to different units of the Rhode Island National Guard. The 243rd Coast Artillery, for example, is one of the units that was in there for quite a while. In fact, one of our founding members and our longest serving commander, Howard Vernon Allen, was also commander of the 243rd Coast Artillery. So we sort of cohabitated with various units of the Rhode Island National Guard in the building all the way up until the 1990s. We have a plaque on the front of the building that lists all the different units that operated out of the Varnum Armory.
So in addition to this militia / social organization, it was actually used to house units of the Rhode Island National Guard.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
How long have you been associated with the Varnum Continentals and curator of the museum?
It goes back to November of 2014. So I had actually went to a public fundraising event with a group of friends about a year before then. And I was enthralled by the museum and its collection, and I wanted to help, I wanted to participate. And so I've been in since that time. Today, the organization largely views itself as a conservation organization. We still have our historic military command, we still have a marching unit. But ultimately, our mission as an organization is to preserve and share Rhode Island military history. And we do that ostensibly to encourage patriotism, to encourage service of all kinds to our local communities and state and country, and also to educate the public and memorialize the service of Rhode Island's military veterans. And to that end, we own and operate actually 2 museum properties. So not only do we have the Varnum Armory Museum, which houses the largest collection of Rhode Island military history, we also own and operate the Varnum House. So the house that James Mitchell Varnum, he bought the land, he built the house in 1773. It's a beautiful property. We operate that as a museum today.
Is that in East Greenwich too?
It is. It's just a few blocks away. It's right behind the town hall of East Greenwich on Pierce Street. It's available for tours throughout the summer. We've invested and we've raised and invested hundreds of thousands of dollars over the last several years in that property. It's really beautiful.
You are undertaking extensive renovation and repairs to the building itself. Tell us about what's going on down there.
Yeah, so as is often the case with private organizations, we're all volunteer, by the way. We've always been all volunteer. You always run this risk of, you have a group that's been managing the organization, and through time they get older, they lose energy. Important players in the organization that did a lot of the work would leave. And so when the current leadership came into the organization around 2014, the building was in a state of very bad disrepair. The staircase in one of our towers was collapsing. We had a very leaky roof. The mortar in the brick was failing. You could literally just pull bricks out of the wall up high. The museum level, which is below ground, not an ideal location for, artifacts, there was no climate control. So there was a moth infestation, there was mold everywhere. So we've spent several years and thousands of hours renovating the building. We immediately installed a climate control system to carefully control not only the temperature but also the humidity. We've received generous grant funding through Champlin Foundation here in Rhode Island, the Rhode Island Foundation, Rhode Island Council for the Arts, the 1772 Foundation. These organizations have been very generous to us, and we've been able to make huge improvements in the building. And as someone who comes in who was there before all these renovations and you come in today, you can really notice the difference. I'm very proud of the work that we've done. Not only did we take care of the building and the climate control and all that, but we've professionalized the care of the museum collection itself. And the collection is just stunning in terms of its quality, its rarity, its importance to Rhode Island history, to American history, and it deserves proper care. And so to that end, we have a collections care policy that we live by that's designed on another professional museum. We've built a lot of relationships with other museums like the Newport Naval War College Museum, the National Museum of the U.S. Army, and Fort Belvoir outside of Washington, D.C. The quality of the collection has allowed us to really build great relationships with these museum professionals that have helped us do the right things. And the other big boon to our organization is that we have a professional textile conservator and a document conservator who work and volunteer with us to basically help take care of our collection and make repairs and display objects properly and that sort of thing.
I think the museum is one of the best kept secrets in Rhode Island, frankly, and let's just describe some of the priceless and irreplaceable items you have in the collection.
So it spans, objects date from before the American Revolution all the way through to the present day. Currently, we're only displaying up through World War II, and we're in the midst of expanding our museum exhibit space by more than double. That's going to allow us to go up through the global war on terror. We have artillery. We have an incredible collection of weapons, uniforms, flags. One of the recent additions to our collection comes to us from Bristol, Rhode Island. Bristol had a collection of historic flags that had been in storage, and they kind of rediscovered that they were there, and asked us to help them investigate what these flags were. Long story short, there were 8 historic flags. Most of them were Civil War veteran flags from Bristol, Rhode Island. And then one was a Civil War battle flag that belonged to the 2nd Rhode Island Volunteers, likely carried at the first Battle of Bull Run, the first major battle in the Civil War. And the other amazing flag in this collection, we had the original flagpole finial that's engraved on all 3 sides, and it basically told us the history of the flag. It dates to, we believe, 1695, which would make it the oldest intact flag in the Western Hemisphere today. And no one knew today that this flag exists. It belonged to the Bristol County Militia. It was purchased by Colonel Nathaniel Byfield, who has an incredible legal career. He's one of the wealthiest people in the colony at the time. He was one of the founders of the town of Bristol itself. And so we have this amazing flag that we've just recently conserved. We're filming a documentary with Rhode Island PBS about our discovery and conservation of the flag, the history of the flag. So that's one incredible item.
It was in Bristol. Was it taken care of over there, or did just somebody, one of these deals where they looked at, oh, what, that looks like something we...
So when we did our research, we found references to this Byfield flag from the ancient Indian War period, going back to the early 19th century, referring to the flag and that it was used and carried in the 4th of July parade every year. So they literally would carry this thing all the way up until, I think, the early 1900s. And at some point, someone realized you shouldn't be carrying such an old flag in a parade today, and they wrapped it around its original flagpole, covered it in plastic, and it was duct taped shut. And we were told this was done about 40 years ago. So no one's fault today that this happened. But it was the absolute worst circumstances possible for such a fragile silk flag like this. It's amazing that it survived. We believe there's a blood stain on the flag. We also found evidence that it was carried in King William's War and Queen Anne's War, 2 very early wars that most Americans have probably never heard of. These were intercolonial conflicts with New France and various Indian tribes. So it has a really unique history. So we're partnering with the National Museum of the U.S. Army to do the conservation, to create a display for the flag. The U.S. Army will be displaying the flag on a national stage. It's going to be seen by hundreds of thousands of people every year, which we're excited about. The town of Bristol is very excited that it's going to get this attention.
So the town of Bristol turned it over to the Varnum Museum?
Yeah, so I made a proposal to the town. I went before the town council, or our conservator and myself, and we proposed that we take the flags in. We have the proper facilities, the climate control, the security, the display space. They didn't have the facility to properly care for it. And basically I said, we will conserve it at our expense, although since Bristol has made a very generous donation to help us conserve the flag. So the flags are to be kept at the Varnum Armory, but they're still technically owned by the town of Bristol.
Talk about some of the uniforms that you have that are a bit unusual or unique.
Yeah, we have an incredible collection of Rhode Island Civil War uniforms. And by the way, that's one of the unique things about our museum, is that most of what you see in our collection is directly tied to Rhode Island, to a specific person, to a specific unit, and that allows us to tell unique stories. So this is a newer collection of artifacts, including a uniform that came into us from a family in Tennessee, the descendants of this man. His name was T. Fred Brown, Thomas Frederick Brown of Providence, Rhode Island. And when the Civil War broke out, very short man. When you look at the uniform, the first thing out of people's mouths is, boy, that person was short. And of course, people tended to be shorter back then. But he was so short that they turned him away. And he went to an artillery battery to enlist, and they took him in despite his height. He ends up in Battery B, 1st Rhode Island Light Artillery, and he commands that battery throughout much of the Civil War. At the Battle of Gettysburg in July of 1863, the biggest battle in the American Civil War, you have 170,000 plus Americans fighting each other over a 3-day period in that early July. By the end of the battle, there was 51,000 plus dead, wounded, and missing. Just epic in scale, horrendous. Battery B arrives on the battlefield on the 2nd day of the battle, July 2nd. The main Union battle is behind a stone wall on Cemetery Ridge. Battery B gets placed in front of that stone wall, perpendicular to the wall, about 300 yards out in advance. And they're engaged with another Confederate artillery battery near General Robert E. Lee's headquarters. In this battery, there are 6 cannons, about 120 Rhode Islanders, a lot of horses. They're deployed in battle, they're firing. Fred is on horseback. He's on a red-colored horse wearing a white hat. And he says that they see a body of troops appear to the west, into their left flank. And they thought they were their own men. And they began to close the distance very rapidly. And then they began to open fire on Fred Brown and his battery. And it becomes a complete melee. Horses are getting cut down. Men are being wounded and killed. Fred Brown has the presence of mind to gather his battery and make a firing retreat, one of the most difficult maneuvers to do in the midst of combat. Back at the stone wall where their main battle line was is a gap in that stone wall, about 30 feet or so. And he feeds his battery back through this gap in the stone wall to safety. They lost 2 guns. Almost all their horses were killed. They barely survived getting wiped out. Now, Fred's just inside the gap in the stone wall. That gap is still there today, by the way. He's leaned over on his horse and he's waving a pistol up in the air, and he's yelling at another officer when he's shot through the neck. Bullet enters his neck, nicks his carotid artery, exits out the back of the neck. Fred falls from his horse. He's left for dead. Eventually, reinforcements come up and they beat the Confederates away. They were Wright's Brigade of Georgia, and they beat these 1,200 Georgians off. And they grab Fred and they drag him back, and Fred's still alive. And he ends up in a hospital, and he comes back to Rhode Island, and he recovers, and he eventually returns to his battery in October. So from July to October, he recovers at home and returns, and he fights the rest of the war. Where the story gets crazy, fast forward 30 years later, the war is long over, and veterans begin to return to the battlefield at Gettysburg to plan the national park. And they are noting where on the battlefield each of their units were to place their monuments. And to place a monument in a given spot for a particular regiment, they would have to get other units to, yes, agree that that's the position where that unit held. Wright's Brigade of Georgia is there on the field, and they knew that they had attacked a Rhode Island battery. And one of their men, Simeon Theus of Savannah, Georgia, writes a letter to the Providence Journal. And he says, hey, we're trying to get a hold of someone that was in this unit. They're not going to forget who we were. They're going to remember us. And the Providence Journal takes Simeon's letter and he hands it to T. Fred Brown. Fred Brown writes Simeon Theus back. And Fred says, I, sir, had the honor of commanding the battery on that day, and you guys shot me. Simeon writes back and he goes, whoa, 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 hold on. He says, I don't want to put words in your head, but were you on a red-colored horse waving a pistol in the air wearing a white hat? Because I've been telling this story for decades that you were the only Yankee I was sure I had killed. And they start writing back and forth, and Fred mentions wearing this conspicuous white hat. Well, this white hat is part of this collection that we now have on display in the museum. It's an artifact, it's a relic, it's a time capsule to July 2nd, 1863, a violent moment frozen in time. There's a faint blood spray on the crown of his hat. There's a bullet hole through the brim. You can still see the lead ring from the lead mini ball was left on the hat. And pinned to the hat when we received it was a little note written in Fred Brown's writing saying, this is the hat worn by T. Fred Brown at Gettysburg on July 2nd, 1863. I get goosebumps looking at it. The letters, the original letters between the two men are also part of this collection. It's an amazing story. I think it's a good story for today. Here's two men that were trying to kill each other in July of 1863, and once the war was over, they became Americans again, and they forgave each other. Fred Brown actually thanked Simeon for shooting him. He says, if you had not wounded me on July 2nd, I probably would not have survived the third day of the battle, where basically all the artillery officers of the 2nd Corps Artillery Brigade were killed on July 3rd. So it's a wonderful story.
You have also, in addition to uniforms, you have some documents, and I think, talk about the letter from a former slave that you have on display.
Yes, this is, so I feel like a kid in a treasure chest a lot of times going through our storage. So we have storage rooms, multiple storage rooms that have all these artifacts that are packed away, and I've been going through all those things for months. And you don't want to get to the last box. It's a lot of fun digging through this stuff. One day I'm there, and I'm going through the collection of material that belonged to one of our founding members. He had passed away in the 1970s, I think, and the family basically took all of his stuff and just gave it to us. And apparently I was the first person to go through these boxes. So I'm there on a Saturday, I'm getting tired, and it's just box after box of random receipts from the 1940s, 50s, 60s, nothing special. And I'm about to give up. I have an open garbage bag at my feet, you know, and I'm like, there's nothing in this box. And I'm tempted to just throw the box in the garbage bag. But for whatever reason, I reached my hand into that bag one last time, and I grabbed a fistful of paper, and I instantly felt old paper. 18th century paper has a very unique feel to it. Pull it out, it's a letter. I noticed that it's a wartime letter dated to the Revolutionary War. I get excited. I read this letter, and I can't believe what I'm reading. It's a letter written, actually dictated, by a gentleman, a soldier, in the 1st Rhode Island Regiment named Thomas Nichols. Thomas Nichols, during the war, up until the time of his enlistment, he had been enslaved by Benjamin and Phoebe Nichols of Warwick, Rhode Island. Their farm was right on the border between East Greenwich and Warwick. And Thomas Nichols was one of about 200 African Americans and Native Americans who earned their permanent freedom in exchange for their service to their new country. Rhode Island was the first to pass a law. It was actually James Mitchell Varnum who passed this idea first to Washington. Washington then passed it on to the governor of Rhode Island. The law was not popular, only lasted for a couple months, so not a lot of people were able to take advantage. Thomas Nichols was one of them. He trains to be a soldier right in East Greenwich, and he ends up in the Battle of Rhode Island a few months later in August of 1777. And he was wounded in that battle, according to one reference book we have, and he would survive. The letter is written in 1780. I'm sorry, Battle of Rhode Island was 1778. So this is like a year and a half later. And he's writing this letter, and it's very sad. He says, he's writing to his former owner, asking him for help to get a discharge. He wants to go home. He wants to go back. We don't know quite what that means. Was he going back to be enslaved again? Did he understand what the repercussions of going back would be? We don't know. But he says, I have no clothes fit to wear. I have no money. I don't know anyone. And the epic line in there is he says, war has been disagreeable to my mind as well as disastrous to my health. I think he has what today we would call PTSD, and this could be one of the first, records from a U.S. soldier talking about what we would call PTSD today.
We have about 5 minutes left, and I have to ask you this question. I have heard that the Armory is haunted. Have you ever experienced any paranormal activity while you're there? Sometimes you're there alone, I suspect.
Yes, and yes, so there are many claims of paranormal activity. It's made me a believer. I don't necessarily know what it actually is, but the type of activity that people would traditionally say is paranormal, we experience that on a, 90% of the time, 95% of the time, nothing happens, but every once in a while something significant will happen. most commonly we'll hear footsteps walking across the ceiling in the drill hall, not just a board popping here and there, but like heel to toe, heel to toe, heel to toe, all the way across the floor. We have security cameras everywhere in the building. I can immediately pull up on my phone and look to see if there's anyone in the building, and no one's there. We can confirm that. We've had doors open and close. We hear voices in the center of the armory. People have done EVP sessions where they record with digital recorders, and they'll get voices and things like that. So all the traditional, normal stuff. I don't feel nervous about it. I don't feel scared unless I'm there at night by myself. And then my first instincts when this type of stuff happens is there's an intruder in the building, and that'll make you nervous. Whatever's there, if there's something there, I think it's friendly.
And what about a specific instance? I know you told me that there was a tour that you gave to 2 women.
Yeah, so we had, this is several years ago now. So when I first took over, I began to change things, and some people on the board were uncomfortable with those changes. There was a big American flag that hung in the main drill hall, and behind that flag that no one ever saw was this plaque. It was like a faux wood plaque that was bought and given to the organization by the gentleman whose name was on the plaque. I won't say whose name that was, but he had donated the flag. And I just thought the plaque wasn't very tasteful. I pulled the plaque off the wall and I put it in our storage room. No one knew that I had done this. One day, a year later, I get a tour request from 2 women from Westerly. And they get not my usual audience for a military history museum. Younger women, I would guess that they're in their 20s, and we're doing the tour. And I noticed they're very distracted, and they're kind of looking away. And I said, is everything okay? And they look at each other, and they say, well, we have abilities. We can see things that other people cannot see. You're psychics? Yeah, sort of. Oh, I'm open to that. Can you tell me what you're experiencing? What are you seeing? And so we kind of walk around the museum, and they tell me things, and interesting stuff, but not, crazy stuff. But what really got me is that at the end of the tour, we're leaving the building, and I was mentioning to one of them, yeah, some of the old-timers here are not really happy with the changes I'm making. And all of a sudden, she looks at me, and she goes, I know. He wants you to put the plaque back on the wall. And even when I tell it now, I get goosebumps. I just felt like the blood, rush out of my face. And how would she know this?
Yeah.
She's never been in the building before. No one knew I had taken this plaque down. What got me is that she drew its kind of unique, long, rectangular shape with her hands. That got me.
We got about a minute left, but my question is the Varnum Museum open to tours now under this renovation that's going on? And how best can they get in touch with you? By going to the website that we're going to be showing on the crawl?
Correct. So we are open. We're open by appointment only at this point. So if you go to our website, you can book a tour. There's a tab on our website. It's very easy. It'll come right to me. Most likely it will be me that will do the tour. And I encourage you to do it. It's free. We are happy to receive donations. But I encourage you to come out and check it. It's an amazing place.
Well, we want to thank you. That's been a very interesting discussion, and I urge people to reach out and take a tour of the Varnum Memorial Armory Museum. And thank you very much, Mr. Donovan, for coming here, and thank you, audience, for watching this edition of State of the State.